Welcome to Sleepy Case Files, a place where quiet storytelling meets mysterious cases. Tonight, we slowly explore a story from the world of true crime.
The historical saga of Starkweather Fugate and Charles Starkweather remains one of the most unsettling chapters in American true crime. Unfolding in the winter of 1958, their ruthless 8-day killing spree across the frozen landscapes of Nebraska and Wyoming dismantled the illusion of domestic safety that characterized post-war America. During the era of the Eisenhower administration, the nation was experiencing an economic boom. Suburbs were growing, and a picture of domestic tranquility was broadcast into living rooms through the new medium of television. However, beneath this polished surface lurked a growing societal panic concerning juvenile delinquency. The Starkweather and Fugate case became the ultimate manifestation of this specific fear. To comprehend why a 14-year-old girl and a 19-year-old garbage collector would embark on a merciless rampage claiming 11 innocent lives, one must examine their individual backgrounds, the controlling dynamics of their romantic relationship, and the specific societal anxieties of that era. Their actions were not random acts of violence, but the explosive culmination of resentment, severe dependency, and a toxic shared delusion that shattered the fragile peace of the American heartland. To understand the rooted motivations behind these horrific crimes, one must look at the primary architect of the extreme violence, Charles Starkweather. Born in 1938 in the Midwestern city of Lincoln, Nebraska, Charles experienced a difficult early life defined by constant struggle and relentless peer humiliation. He suffered from a noticeable speech impediment and was born with a mild physical deformity, leaving his legs bow-legged. These two physical characteristics made him a target for brutal bullying throughout his formative school years. In the unforgiving social hierarchy of mid-century childhood, Charles was relegated to the bottom rung. Experts analyzing his developmental history noted that this persistent daily victimization fostered a malignant resentment toward mainstream society. He developed a toxic sense of injustice, coupled with a burning desire for violent retribution against a world he felt had rejected him from the moment of his birth. Instead of seeking out healthy coping mechanisms to manage his emotional pain, Charles retreated into a distorted sense of aggressive antisocial rebellion. By his mid-teenage years, he had developed an obsessive fascination with the Hollywood actor James Dean. He idolized his rebellious cinematic role in the 1955 film Rebel Without a Cause. Charles adopted the actor's signature visual aesthetic, outfitting himself in a heavy leather jacket and cultivating a brooding, unapproachable persona. He even practiced Dean's mannerisms in front of a mirror for hours. However, while the cinematic rebellion was rooted in a desperate human search for genuine emotional understanding, Charles' dark personal rebellion was destructive and nihilistic. Dropping out of his local high school at the age of 16, he began working a series of low-paying physical jobs, primarily functioning as a city garbage collector. This dirty occupation cemented his bitter negative self-image as a permanent social outcast. Every day he handled the refuse of the middle-class citizens who looked down on him. He became a walking powder keg of unchecked rage, waiting for an unpredictable external spark to ignite his massive lethal potential. That fatal external spark arrived in 1956 when the 18-year-old Charles was introduced to the young Caroline Fugate. She was 13 years old at the time of their initial meeting. Carol lived in a chaotic and unstable household located in a rough, working-class neighborhood of Lincoln. Her daily family life was removed from the idealized, harmonious nuclear family promoted by the mainstream media during that historical decade. Her biological mother, Velda, had remarried a stern man named Marion Bartlett. The overall domestic environment was described by close neighbors as volatile, physically argumentative, and dysfunctional. For an impressionable teenage girl living in such a grim, starved reality, the sudden, undivided attention of an older, rebellious teenager like Charles must have felt intoxicating and empowering. He provided a desperate escape from her bleak existence and offered a sense of importance she had never experienced at home. Charles devoted his entire daily existence to Caril. He was possessive, jealous, and rigidly controlling. These are dangerous traits that mask themselves as romantic affection during the early stages of abusive interpersonal relationships. He bought her various small gifts with his limited weekly wages and provided a crucial escape from her depressing, chaotic, domestic family life. For the alienated Charles, Carol became his sole anchor to basic human connection. She represented the only person on the entire earth he believed understood and respected him without harsh judgment. In the specialized realm of modern criminal behavior, their destructive union is viewed through the specific analytical lens of a shared delusional disorder. This is known in formal psychiatric literature as folie à deux. In such terrifying and close scenarios, a dominant, aggressive personality imposes their sociopathic worldview onto a submissive, vulnerable partner, causing standard societal boundaries between objective right and wrong to evaporate. The irreversible transition to actual cold-blooded lethal murder occurred on the dark evening of December 1st, 1957. Charles, harboring intense, irrational anger over a minor unpaid financial credit dispute and seeking fast cash to entertain Caril, decided to rob a local Lincoln gas station. He kidnapped the 21-year-old station attendant, Robert Colbert. He forced the terrified man into a vehicle at gunpoint, drove him to a desolate rural area outside the quiet city limits, and executed him with a devastating blast from a loaded shotgun. This initial violent murder represented the final crossing of a definitive threshold for Charles. He overwhelmingly realized that holding a loaded weapon and pulling a small trigger granted him total power over human life and death. Although Carol was not present for this first killing, the violent event altered Charles's entire behavioral trajectory. He had tasted the ultimate transgression against polite society and found the resulting rush of absolute power exhilarating. The unbridled horror of their destructive shared narrative began several weeks later on the fateful afternoon of January 21st, 1958. This took place inside the cramped, messy Fugate family residence. Charles arrived at the small house, and a furious, escalating, intense verbal argument erupted between him and Carol's disapproving mother, Velda, along with her strict, harsh stepfather, Marion. The undeniable, horrifying outcome was an absolute, devastating explosion of unimaginable, horrific violence. Charles shot and killed Marion, then fatally shot Velda as she frantically attempted to flee the deadly violence. In a final mind-boggling, sickening act of sheer unrestrained brutality, he struck Carol's innocent 2-year-old half-sister Betty Jean. He then fatally stabbed the helpless crying infant in the delicate area of her neck, ensuring her immediate death and sealing Carril's dark fate. The suddenness of the attack left the family defenseless against his armed rage. This specific horrifying moment represents the single most fiercely debated and meticulously analyzed aspect of the entire historical true crime case. Why exactly did Carol Ann Fugate stay with the violent man who had just slaughtered her entire immediate family? When strict law enforcement authorities later questioned her, Carol vehemently and tearfully maintained that Charles had taken her as a terrified, unwilling hostage. She claimed she innocently returned home from school to find Charles heavily armed, erratic, and dangerous. She stated she cooperated with his terrifying demands out of a paralyzing fear that he would execute her family members if she offered physical resistance. According to her account, Charles told her that her family was being held captive elsewhere. However, prosecuting state attorneys and expert forensic profilers cast profound evidence-based doubt upon her specific narrative. For an astonishing uninterrupted 6 days immediately following the slaughter, Carol and Charles continuously and calmly lived together inside the very small house. They turned away multiple visitors by hanging a deceptive handwritten note in the front door, falsely claiming everyone inside was sick with a contagious flu. They watched regular television programming and ate normal daily meals, all while the decomposing bodies of her family were hidden away in the rudimentary wooden outbuildings situated on the actual physical property. Behavioral analysts argue that the sheer, unbroken chronological duration of this specific cohabitation suggests a disturbing, active level of genuine complicity. In her fractured mental state, she may have chosen the terrifying certainty of Charles over the unthinkable reality of what he had done to her family. On January 27, 1958, realizing that active police discovery of the hidden rotting bodies was imminent due to the growing inquiries of worried relatives, 2 armed teenagers fled the small house. This initiated their random, fast-moving killing spree across the frozen Great Plains. Their first deadly unprovoked stop was the isolated, snowy rural farmhouse of a 70-year-old family friend named August Meyer. Charles shot the defenseless elderly man, dead ostensibly for the singular cold purpose of stealing his weapons, spare ammunition, and basic survival supplies. The fleeing teenage couple desperately needed practical physical resources to continue their flight from state justice. Later that exact same busy day, their loaded fleeing vehicle became hopelessly stuck in thick, freezing mud along a remote country dirt road. 2 innocent local teenagers, 17-year-old Robert Jensen and his 16-year-old girlfriend Carol King, stopped their functional vehicle to offer friendly neighborly assistance to the stranded young couple. Charles responded to their selfless kindness by forcing the terrified local teenagers into an abandoned underground storm cellar at gunpoint. He then brutally and mercilessly shot Robert in the back of the head, cold-bloodedly executing him instantly. Following this unprovoked execution, he attempted to forcefully sexually assault the terrified Carol. After this failed attempt, he shot and killed her as well. The explicit motive for these 2 specific murders was laced with Charles's seething, deep-seated resentment toward normal, happy, mainstream teenagers. These 2 specific victims represented the exact mainstream demographic that had cruelly rejected him his entire miserable life. Driving the stolen vehicle, the lethal young couple returned to the city of Lincoln and brazenly invaded the affluent, secure, luxurious home of C. Lauer Ward, a prominent, wealthy local industrialist, and his lovely wife, Clara. This specific, calculated, bold home invasion represented a stark, dramatic escalation and a clear, undeniable manifestation of class conflict. Charles, the impoverished, mocked garbage collector, was asserting his ultimate absolute dominance over the wealthy, seemingly untouchable social elite of his hometown. Inside the beautiful home, they murdered Clara Ward and her loyal housekeeper, an innocent 51-year-old woman named Lillian Fenkel. When C. Lauer Ward returned to his quiet residence later that same afternoon, Charles shot and killed him as well. Seeking faster transportation to evade the police dragnet, they stole the Ward family's luxurious Packard automobile and fled the state entirely. By this time, the city of Lincoln was gripped by absolute terror. Schools were locked down, the National Guard was called in to patrol the streets, and citizens armed themselves, terrified that the teenage killers would strike their homes next. The sheer, terrifying, unpredictable randomness of these escalating killings is what deeply terrified the entire American public during that specific winter. They were operating on pure, fatalistic, high-octane adrenaline. They both likely subconsciously knew their ultimate inevitable capture or violent death was certain. Because of this, they consciously chose to go out in a massive, publicized, bloody blaze of violent glory. The chaotic end of their terrifying journey occurred on January 29, 1958, near the small, quiet town of Douglas, Wyoming. Desperately needing to switch their recognizable stolen vehicle yet again to avoid capture, they encountered a 34-year-old traveling shoe salesman named Merle Collison. He was peacefully sleeping undisturbed in his parked Buick alongside the desolate highway. Without hesitation, Charles shot the sleeping man 9 separate times. However, in his frantic, panicked rush to escape the bloody scene, Charles struggled to operate the unfamiliar foot-operated parking brake of the large Buick. While he was wrestling with the tight mechanical controls, a passing geologist named Joe Sprinkle stopped his personal car to offer roadside help. A desperate, intense physical struggle ensued between the armed Charles and the intervening geologist. At this precise, critical, chronological moment, an armed Wyoming highway patrolman named William Romer pulled his official police cruiser up to the chaotic scene. It was exactly here that Carol Ann Fugate ran toward the fully uniformed officer. She theatrically screamed that Charles was going to kill her, declaring that he was the madman murdering innocent people across the region. Realizing the desperate situation was lost, Charles abandoned Carol, fled the bloody scene in the previously stolen vehicle, and was pursued by determined law enforcement officers. After a tense, dangerous, high-speed highway chase, Charles surrendered to the state authorities. The publicized subsequent legal trial captivated the watching nation. Angered by her public denunciation, Charles vengefully testified that Caril was a willing, active participant in the 8-day rampage, explicitly claiming she had pulled the trigger herself on several occasions. The prosecution painted a picture of a remorseless girl who enjoyed the thrill of the crimes. The impaneled jury found it impossible to genuinely believe Carol's constructed legal defense of being a helpless hostage. She showed very little emotion during the proceedings, which the jury interpreted as cold callousness. At the remarkably young age of 14, Carol Ann Fugate was convicted of first-degree murder. She received a life sentence, making her one of the youngest females in United States history to be tried and convicted for first-degree murder. She spent 18 years in a maximum security prison before receiving parole in 1976. Charles Starkweather was predictably sentenced to death by the state. He never showed any remorse for the 11 lives he ended, maintaining his rebellious posture until the very end. He was executed in the electric chair on June 25, 1959. Their dark story serves as a permanent reminder of the destruction that occurs when trauma and toxic control collide. The case left a permanent scar on the American collective consciousness, and proving that horrifying violence could emerge from the seemingly innocent heartland. It inspired numerous cultural works, including movies and music, cementing their names in the dark annals of true crime history. The debate over Carril's true level of guilt continues to this day among historians and legal scholars, ensuring the Starkweather and Fugate murders will never be forgotten by society.